Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the NAHASDA Intermediate Training. My name is Lourdes, and I am listed as first pick meetings in the participant list. I'm here to help you over the course of the training with any technical or material questions you may have. I also have added the material links in the chat. I did that yesterday. I'll do that again today so that everyone could follow along. And it was also sent to all participants on Friday. And now I will turn it over to Sonia and David, which will be your trainers today.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. It's still dark and early here in Alaska. Well, wow, we covered so much material yesterday. And before we get started with more material, I wanted to check in with you to see if there's anything you wanted to discuss further that we covered yesterday, any questions you might have. Yesterday we covered a overview of NAHASDA, really focused in on the information about requirements, the law that created NAHASDA, the NAHASDA regulations, the uniform guidance, and then we talked about the PIH notices and the program guidances, and the requirements for management capacity to be an effective recipient of the NAHASDA funds. And then we jumped into a very challenging component of the program having to do with occupancy, particularly determination of eligibility and the calculation of payments. Had some activities in that regard, covered a lot of material there. So are there any questions or comments? We can go back and maybe overnight you were thinking about things and you say, well, I really didn't get that part, or I didn't follow that calculation. So let's see, I see we have a couple chats. Good morning from Spokane. Good morning, Spokane. But I don't see anything else. So if not, we'll just plow ahead. But we can, if something comes to mind, we want to have an interactive session here. So we're encouraging questions and discussion and sharing. So please send us a chat or unmute your microphone so we can have that interchange. But moving on the agenda, we're actually a little bit ahead on the agenda right now. But the next thing is eligible activities under NAHASDA. And there's a fantastic guidance notice. This is the best source of information about eligible activities under NAHASDA. And that's in Program Guidance 2010-03. And I just noticed this morning that instead of having Program Guidance 2010-03, we had Program Guidance 2010-30. So I made the correction on this slide. That is the correct number. And if you're working with the Indian Housing Plan, IHP, or the Annual Performance Report, APR, or you're involved with planning for what activities you're going to undertake under NAHASDA, this is something you want to have a copy of. This is one of the most frequently referenced pieces of guidance that we use in the program, because it is so comprehensive on how the funds can be used. And it's amazingly flexible scope of work that can be funded with the NAHASDA funds. So let's go ahead and jump into this. And by the way, I mentioned the IHB and the APR. That is something that we cover in the NAHASDA Essentials class. So really, that's another example of how the NAHASDA Essentials class and the NAHASDA Intermediate classes really intermesh. And to get the whole 360-degree view of the program, you really need to go to both. All right, so Program Guidance 2010-03. Affordable housing activities and administrative activities. So the NAHASDA law in section 202 lists down classifications of affordable housing activities, and there are 6 of those. The first thing I always like to say about these 6 classifications is the description is, I think it's misleading. For example, the first classification is called Indian Housing Assistance. However, the only activity that falls under this category is the operations and modernization of units developed under the Housing Act of 1937 that the housing provider still owns and manages. So under the Housing Act of 1937, primarily it had to do with the development and operation of low rent units and mutual help units. So the mutual help program is a home ownership program. Virtually all of those mutual help units have been conveyed at this point in time. But of course, the rental units are still there and operating. But as you convey or dispose of Housing Act of 1937 units, the amount of funding you get goes down because one of the formula areas is specifically related to the operation and modernization of those units developed under the Housing Act of 1937. So let me just also mention in this regard that every year, should be in September, you get a report on the data that's going to be used for your formula allocation. And so you have responsibility to review that and basically so you can verify what data is being used. And if you don't agree with the data, you have the right to challenge it. One of the things that you need to review and update is the unit count for Housing Act of 1937 units. The number of units that you are operating and maintaining and modernizing that was funded through NAHASDA is not part of the formula allocation. So that's something you have to keep in mind. That I mentioned it yesterday when we were talking about financing, is if you're committing a portion of your funds for subsidy, you're not going to get any additional funds to cover that subsidy allocation that you choose to make. So that's got to be, you have to understand that in order to properly plan the financing for your operation. The first classification of eligible activity then is to operate and modernize the units from the Housing Act of 1937 that you still own and operate. All right, so let's go on and take a look at the next one. Second one is called development. And of course, development, we think about new construction, at least I do. But there's so much more that falls into development. Acquisition, down payment assistance. So that might include closing cost assistance or direct lending, interest subsidies, or other types of financial assistance to help people become home buyers, homeowners. Reconstruction, moderate rehab, all different types of rehab, including conversion of non-residential buildings into housing, improvements for energy efficiency, site improvements, which might include recreational area and playgrounds for use of residents of affordable housing, streets and sidewalks, development and rehab of utilities and utility services for affordable housing units, demolition, relocation, related relocation costs, doing environmental review for your development projects, and of course, administration and planning costs for the affordable housing development activities you're undertaking, and architectural engineering planning. So anything falling into upgrading or adding to the number of units that you have falls into this category. And the next category is called housing services. So, this is really an amazing scope of eligible activities that you can fund under this classification. That would include counseling regarding housing, rental or home ownership, maintaining or supporting, creating resident organizations, resident management corporations, energy auditing, and then quite a list of self-sufficiency programs. So again, this is one of the objectives, one of HUD's objectives for this program is self-sufficiency. So that would include childcare costs for residents of affordable housing, for residents to get job training and jobs, transportation costs, so that residents can again attend training, job placement and job training for residents of affordable housing. And then this is really tremendous opportunity, I think, is assistance to residents in obtaining other federal, state, and local assistance. So helping people connect with other resources, fantastic opportunity there. And then homeless prevention activities, which would be short-term subsidies to defray rent and utility bills that families have received. Otherwise they would lose their housing, or the housing would become unlivable without utilities. Security deposits or first month's rent to enable a family to move into their apartment. So when you think about it, that's a very low cost way of helping people get into housing, is simply providing that cash they need in order to move in. They can, in other words, just families can afford a monthly rent, but they can't afford all the upfront cash to establish residency. Similarly, payments to prevent foreclosure on a home. And then tenant-based rental assistance. So an example of that would be to assist college students with housing assistance so they can attend college. And then also project-based rental assistance. And training courses related to the administration of affordable housing activities. So, you know, if you were traveling to attend this training, you know, you could this would be eligible costs under this category. And then also youth activities that reduce or eliminate the use of drugs. And that can take a whole range of areas, you know, salaries for staffing, educational programs, boys and girls clubs, recreational equipment, travel for youth to participate in sporting events, not entertainment, but actually, you know, to engage in sporting events. So, you know, huge opportunities here to help people with services. Then we move on to the next category. The fifth category is housing management. And well, this falls in more into technical areas, preparation of work specifications, loan processing, inspections, the occupancy function, tenant selection, management of tenant-based or project-based rental assistance programs, mediation programs for landlord-tenant disputes. Oh, and this is also can be used for hiring a grant writers to help you be more successful in obtaining additional funding for your housing program. And then here maybe is the most important category in this eligible category, which is operating assistance for NAHASDA assisted units. So if you're assisting units developed under the Housing Act of 1937, would be the first classification that we talked about. But if you're going to be using funds to assist units that you develop with the NAHASDA funds, then it would be under this one, the fourth category, housing management services. So, you know, again, a lot of potential activity under this classification. Then we move on to crime prevention, safety activities. This is very limited. It's limited to physical improvements to property, having to do with security. You know, it could be fencing, lighting, cameras, the road bumps to maintain traffic control. And also, of course, security personnel and equipment for that personnel. And if you have an idea for an affordable housing activity that does not fit in to the prior 5 categories that we just reviewed, then it may be eligible as a model activity. And that is the 6th category of eligible affordable housing activity. So, oops, didn't keep up with the slides. So the model activities, the type of model activities, it's a catch-all, but a lot of those things fall into facilities that serve more than affordable housing activities. So for example, if you're building a office for housing and it will only be used for affordable housing purposes, 100% of the cost for that would be eligible as a model activity. However, if you're building if you want to help fund a community building, and that community building will be used for affordable housing activities as well as other activities, then the cost of that community building would have to be prorated between the users. So the portion that you use for affordable housing activities would be eligible, but the rest of it would have to be paid with another funding source. And this is all explained in Program Guidance 2013-09. It explains, it gives a lot of examples of model activities that are commonly used. It talks about how to apply to HUD for approval, because model activities must be approved on a case-by-case basis. Yep. And it also explains the proration issue of costs. But I certainly don't want to discourage you from pursuing model activities. Model activities are done on a regular basis. If the Program Guidance 2013-09 really lays it out to on how to proceed in getting approval for model activity very clearly. When applying for a model activity, there is, if you're familiar with the Indian Housing Plan annual performance report, there is a section in the form that you use for the IHP APR to request approval for a model activity. Some model activities are really simple and straightforward, and the Indian Housing Plan could be used for that. But anything that involves proration, you really need to, my recommendation is to apply for approval of that model activity separately, because there's a lot of information that would need to be provided to HUD, and their review can take quite a while to go, depending on the complexity of the model activity you want to undertake. One of the things about model activities I might mention is there is a requirement we'll be talking about later that restricts the amount of funding that can be used on the use of affordable housing activities. That's called the total development cost, TDC. The TDC does apply to model activities, and so HUD is going to have to develop a TDC for the model activity that you're requesting. So that gives you some insight about the detail and complexity that gets into getting approval for model activities. And I'm telling you this not to discourage you from pursuing model activities, but simply to encourage you to apply for HUD approval for model activities before you submit your Indian Housing Plan. I think that can be best done as a separate document. Okay. Now, before we move on here, I do want to mention that this program guidance for affordable housing activities 2010-03 continues to talk about administrative and planning costs. So that is obviously you're going to be expending funds for administration and planning costs. There is a cap on how much you can spend on those activities. And this guidance talks about some information about that. And then there's another guidance about administration and planning costs. I'll just mention it here, which is it's actually a PIH notice 2014-15. Again, PIH notice 2014-15 is the best source of information about administration and planning expenses. One of the things that this document encourages you to do is to expense administration and planning costs directly related to the affordable housing activity, to that affordable housing activity. And by doing that, one of the advantages of doing that is that it doesn't, those costs don't apply to the planning and administration cap, number one, and number two, by expensing the administration and planning costs to that affordable housing activity, you can see what the costs of the full cost of that activity is. If you just lump everything together into planning and admin, how do you manage that? How do you know what's going on there on a activity basis? You really can't do it. All right, so let's move on and talk about eligible costs. Here's a concept that comes into development, and we are going to be talking about development quite a bit in this webinar. This idea of hard costs and soft costs. Well, very simply, hard costs are actual costs directly related to development, construction, the construction aspect of it. It's the materials, it's the labor to install the materials, you know, the heavy equipment involved with it and all that stuff. Those are hard costs. But before you ever get to the hard costs, you have to incur soft costs. These are the, you might say, the administrative and management and planning costs having to do with construction. Well, to start with, we always start with environmental review. We're going to be talking about the environmental review later in the training, but there's an environmental review requirement attached to every single federal dollar. So, you know, we always start with the environmental review. But, you know, there's the engineering costs, the architectural costs, the appraisal costs, if you're involved with real property in some way, purchasing real property, the appraisal that's involved, required, the soil testing, the marketing of the development, and of course inspections, any counseling involved, and the financing costs are all considered soft costs. And it's important to recognize that we have to think about, identify, and plan for the soft costs as well as the hard costs. It just seems human nature that we focus on the construction, the hard costs, and we tend to only think about the soft costs. But the soft costs are important and, you know, must be recognized, and, you know, can add up to be substantial costs. Okay, another concept we wanted to communicate here is that we have to understand programs and projects. It's just really a way of classifying activities. So a program can be a group of projects. So for example, you might have a development program or a rehab program, something like that. But those type of programs typically are made up of a pipeline of projects. And then typically a program is going to have a program manager. So that program manager provides the oversight the direction, the leadership for the program in general, and you may have project managers assigned for specific portions of that program. On the other hand, a project is temporary in nature. So there's a start and an end. As opposed to another classification of operations, operations is just the day-to-day work that's necessary to sustain and support the operation of your business. So I think that's the easiest way to define a project compared to a program is a project has a beginning and an end, where a program is ongoing and the operations is a part of a program to sustain the business. So let's just have a short activity here to apply this concept. So we have a list of activities here. And so we're asking you, is it a program or is it a project? So the first one, Indian Housing Block Grant. How do you see it? Project or program? And then secondly here on our poll is the development of a 10-unit low-income housing tax credit housing. So go ahead and yeah, thank you. We got our first vote here on our poll. Oh, I see. This slide is actually pulled down. Okay, so they're all listed here. I need to make the screen a little larger.
Yeah, they're all there.
Okay, I see. Okay.
You just scroll on down.
Yep, great. Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, getting good responses here. All right, so let's go through here. Why don't we start with number one? So Indian Housing Block Grant, is that a program or a project? I would say that is a program. It's an ongoing, it's ongoing. There's no end to it. In fact, your grant never ends. You just from 1 year to the next, you simply get additional allocation of funding. That grant stays open, and clearly that's a program. Now, your Indian Housing Block Grant, however, can include, and I'm sure it does include, many different projects. So that's, I guess, brings us to the point of saying we need to think in terms of to help us understand the scope and the operating requirements of a program as opposed to a project. Okay, and then development of a 10-unit low-income housing tax credit housing. I would say the development of the 10-unit tax credit project or program of tax credit housing would be a project. So the development, there's a start date on the development and there's a completion date on the development. So that would be a project. Now, the low-income housing tax credit is also a program, and that program is going to be ongoing. over time, you may have additional new development of tax credit housing units. So you may have a series of projects that have a start and end date, but you have an ongoing tax credit program because you're going to be operating that program for 30 years or more. And then elders midday meal. Yes, I would say this might be one that could be a project if it's a one-time deal. Maybe there's a special event that you say, okay, we're going to have this event, this specific event. On the other hand, a regular ongoing program to provide midday meals to elders obviously would be a program that's ongoing. A project, the nature of a project is where there's a start date and an end date. And then student dorm housing, I would think about that as a program because
David, your computer froze a second. Sandra, did you want to go ahead and finish? Well,
I can try that if I've got access. Let me see if I do.
could just be an internet issue on his side. David, just come back in whenever you get activity again.
On the elders midday meal that's run by housing, okay, that could be either a program or a project like David was talking about. It is more a program because it is ongoing all the time and doesn't really have a beginning and an end. And I think David's back once he can pull the screen back up.
okay, well, it sounds like you explained that. And then the next one is student dorm housing. So yeah, I see that as a program because even though you can have a turnover of students over time, you have a program that's running year after year. So students are coming in and then leaving and so on and so forth, but it's an ongoing program. And then energy upgrades to student dorm housing. Yes, everybody agrees that's a project. You know, that's an event that occurs with a start date and end date. And then mortgage down payment assistance. I guess you could look at each participant in that as a project, and really, in a sense, it is, because it can get you know, be a long-term activity, getting people ready for to qualify for a mortgage, but you have an ongoing program. The program provides down payment assistance to enable people to purchase a home, and therefore, you know, it's I think it's best to think about that as a program. And then the last one here is mold and moisture prevention rehab activity. Yeah, and everybody agrees that's a project. Again, rehab, it has a start and end. So that would be a project. Okay. And so we'll move on here. And that completes our presentation on eligible activities. Are there any questions or discussion about that? While you're thinking about that, let me just say that obviously this is a very flexible scope of work that you have in with your NAHASDA funding. And this amount of flexibility is rare in federal programs. Most federal programs have very limited uses. So when we think about NAHASDA funds and with this flexible, such a huge scope of work of flexibility, it becomes a real asset for leveraging. So if you think about, if you're thinking about using other funding sources in conjunction with NAHASDA, those other funding sources can be used for certain portions of what you're trying to do because they have a limited scope of work. They're kind of, you're kind of boxed in on how you can use those funds, and there's gaps between those boxes, and that's where NAHASDA comes in. If you think of NAHASDA funds as a source of that gap financing, then you can start seeing the opportunity to use other programs for certain areas of whatever it is that you want to undertake. And then look at the NAHASDA funds to fill in those gaps to make use of the flexibility there. The other thing I wanted to comment on here having to do with affordable housing activities, in order to expend money on any activity, it must be it must be included in your current Indian housing plan. So although you have a tremendous amount of flexibility options on the use of your Indian housing block grant under NAHASDA, you are required to make decisions about how you're going to use those funds during your program year, during that 12-month period of time, which we refer to in the program as being your program year. If you want to do something that is not currently on your Indian housing plan, you are required to do an Indian housing plan revision in order to add that activity that you want to expend funds for. If on the other hand, you in your current Indian housing plan, if you decide that you are not going to expend funds on one of the activities or less funds on one of the activities that you have in your Indian housing plan, that does not require revision. You simply inform HUD of your decision not to expend funds on that activity and why in your annual performance report. So I just wanted to make that comment, since really otherwise we don't talk about the Indian housing plan or APR in the intermediate training, because we cover that in the essentials. All right, so let's see, do we have anything on the chat? Questions about affordable housing activities? I guess not.
No, I don't see anything. Do you want to take a short break in between your segments, David?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we could take, let's see. Yeah, why don't we come back? We'll just start at 9 o'clock and we'll talk about policy requirements. And
that's either 12 o'clock or whatever.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Parts of the country.
I did better on that yesterday. I didn't say times. I said, so in this case, I'll say top of the hour.
There we go.
Okay. Works. I'll see you in about 12 minutes.
We'll take a short break. Thank you.
So. Okay, so any questions before we move on to policies? All right. Well, it's interesting to note here that the statutes and regulations both talk about the requirements for policies and also procedures. We talked about that yesterday in regard to the uniform guidance. But NAHASDA law itself talks about the requirement of recipients to have policies in place. Now, the very best guidance we have on required policies is Program Guidance 2002-11, and of course, that is in your digital library. We went through materials in the digital library yesterday. So we have active links to the policies and the notices, the program guidances and the PIH notices that we're incorporating into this training in your digital library. So policies and procedures are really important because they provide an important benefit to your program. It's a way of formally communicating to everybody involved or interested in your programs about how you do business, what kind of services you offer, who's eligible, the application procedures, their requirements as participants, and so on. But not only to the general public and people that are involved in your program, but also to your staff. Policies is also the way that your governing body communicates to the administrative staff how they want you to operate. So the policies is a formal directive on what is to be done. And it's a lot of work to develop clear and effective policies and procedures, but the payoff is huge. It's an investment worth making. Because once you have it in place, you simply operate in accordance with those policies and procedures. So when someone comes up and says, here's the situation, what should I do? The first question is, what does our policy and procedure say about that? And if the policies and procedures do not address that, then you need to figure out how to respond to the situation. And once you go through that decision-making process, then the next step is to incorporate that into your policy and procedure. So over time, your policies and procedures will evolve, will expand to incorporate new issues that come up over time that you need to make a decision about. And those are opportunities to improve your policies and procedures. And again, that does take some time to amend your policies and procedures, but it's investment that will pay off in the future, because when that circumstance comes up again, the question is, what do our policies and procedures say about that? That issue will be addressed. It also provides consistency in how you handle things. So I encourage you all to strive to operate in a business-like manner, where you operate in accordance with your policies and procedures, where you treat everybody the same. When someone asks you why you did something, the best possible answer you can give is because it's in our policies and procedures. It's typically not your job to develop the policies and procedures, but your job is to follow the policies and procedures. So if there's an issue with the policies and procedures, that would be an issue for upper management to recognize, okay, we may need to make an adjustment here. So the policies and procedures should be viewed as living documents. And the only way they can be living documents is that they're used on a daily basis and they're updated as needed. One of the really great ways in the value of the policy and procedure is that it's really a staff training tool as well. If your policies and procedures are comprehensive and clear, really they lay out how staff perform their job. They can include particularly well, let's talk about the difference between policies and procedures. They're not the same thing. I think of policies is really a statement of intent, where, in other words, they say you will admit eligible people, and there might be some guidelines in the policy about what's eligible, but the procedures is where you get into how you make that determination, the step-by-step process, the documentation involved, the forms that you use, who signs off on determinations, where is that filed, how do you maintain those records, and that needs to be clear enough so those records are retrievable and that important records are not destroyed after the retention period. And one example of that, I think Sonia and I always like to mention in this training session is you always have to retain the original documents that determine the family that you're assisting was determined eligible at the time of admission. Because if that family was not, if you cannot show that family was eligible, when you think about it, they were admitted 5 years ago. 5 years ago, they were eligible. You determined they were eligible, but if you were making a determination of eligibility today, they may not be, simply because their income went up. And so and that's fine, because once they're in the program, they were found eligible at the time of admission. Over time, they may no longer would be determined eligible if they were applying today because their income went up. But the only way you can demonstrate that they were eligible at the time of admission is to have those original documents. So those documents must be retained and not be disposed of at the end of the record retention period. And so that needs to be part of the permanent file for everybody participating in your program. So those type of details.
Anything too, David, when they have to add to that file and add a second file to it, move that original certification to your second file. Don't leave it in the first file that'll get lost somewhere where it's filed away. Always be able to pull that original application that shows that they were eligible at the time of admission.
Exactly. Exactly right. Thank you. And so that is the type of information that you need to have in your policy, in your procedures. Because otherwise, how is a new staff person possibly going to know that? And once those records are disposed of, they can't be recreated. So, again, it's really important to make the investment in policies and procedures, because it'll pay off tremendously in the future. It's an investment worth making. Now, how you organize and maintain and update your policies, procedures, that's up to you. And I've seen it being done in a number of ways. I have seen one organization, they had one policy, and they just had one document that included all their policies and procedures in one single document. But it's more common to have an assortment of policies that are based on topic areas, like occupancy for particular programs. Sometimes policies and procedures are separate documents. Sometimes procedures are incorporated into policies. Whatever works for you. Some of the dynamics here have to do with how your governing body operates. So typically the board will be responsible for adopting policies, but the executive director is responsible for procedures, because those are simply administrative activities to accomplish that explain how the policy will be achieved. But that creates that with some organizations, every time they go to the board to do a policy update, it becomes a complicated, time-consuming process, and so it's not in those cases, it may not be effective to have procedures incorporated with the policy. So if you need to update a procedure, it really does not require a policy revision. So those things are separated. So those are your calls about the best way to organize your policies and procedures. Okay, so what are the required policies and rents and payments? Typically the rents and payments are incorporated into your occupancy policy for each program. You may have a separate collection policy. So how are late, what is the process to respond when people do not pay on time? And of course, the occupancy, what are the requirements for people that are in your program? And that's going to change, that could probably would vary quite a bit between programs. And how are you going to maintain your property? How are you going to maintain, which would include how are work orders done? How are records maintained? How are expenses related to maintenance managed? Who determines chargebacks, things like that. Selection criteria is a very important issue, because of course this is where this is a very sensitive issue, because this determines who you're going to select to receive benefits from the program. So there's a lot of interest in this. People need to feel that they are selected fairly based on objective criteria. Also, your selection criteria needs to be effective in getting the right people into your program. And so if you are having problems with the people that are coming into your program in terms of maintaining the unit and otherwise meeting their responsibilities as a participant in your program, that really is a selection issue. Why is your selection process failing to get the right people into your program? So if you are consistently admitting people in your program that don't pay their rent, then there's an issue with your selection criteria. Somehow you need to have a filter so that more of the people that you're selecting are paying their rent on time. And that has to do with, evaluating the applicant.
It also
Uh,
can go to how well they enforce the policies that they have written. If you're not
Yep.
getting your collections, then you're not enforcing your policies the way you need to be enforcing your policies. A policy is only as good as how well you implement and enforce it.
Oh, Sonia, I'm so glad you brought that up. That is so true. If you have things in your policy that you're not doing, it should not be in your policy. Once you have a policy, you are required to follow that policy. So if you have something in your policy that you're not doing, you have a tremendous liability there. And that would include collections. Collection policies typically have a step-by-step process that includes time frames and what's going to happen and so on and so forth. And if you're not doing that, what are you doing? And whatever it is that you're doing, and either you have a management problem in that you're not implementing that policy, or that policy is so inappropriate or unrealistic that you're not following it. Well, if you're not following what's in your policy, what are you doing? Maybe you're simply not collecting.
There's
So,
there's a tribe in southern Louisiana that has some of the best maintained properties that I have ever seen. And the reason that they do is because on their policies and on inspections, it states that when they go out and do an inspection on the property, that anything that is not what it should be, on maintenance, as far as the things that they're required to do as an occupant, they get written up. And if they get written up, they have a certain time frame in order to correct what was written up. They go back and re-inspect that property. If they have not done what they were written up for, they begin eviction processes. And I mean, literally, it will evict people for not maintaining the properties, just like they do for not paying rent. So it just depends on how stringent you want your policies to be. And they have beautiful properties that are very well maintained, and they collect their rents without much rent arrearage ever. So they don't have much as far as tenant accounts receivable, because they enforce the policies that they have in place.
That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And that really is the point. Figure out what you're going to do and then do it. Figure out what you're going to do, incorporate that into your policies and procedures, make that information public and follow up on it. And if you're challenged on why you did something, the answer is because it's in our policies and procedures. And that's your job. Go ahead, Sonia.
I'll start saying, this is, as you all know, everybody talks to everybody in our tribal communities. And if they know that you're enforcing policies, they're going to follow through doing what they need to do. If they know that you're not enforcing policies, they're going to fall right in line with that. If they know that you're not doing evictions for non-collection of rent, or that you're not doing an eviction, for non-maintenance of the property, then word travels. But if you are in fact enforcing your policies, word travels there as well. And they know, hey, I've got to do what I'm supposed to do, or I'm not going to be able to live in this housing anymore.
Exactly right. Yes. So in a scenario like Sonia just described to us, when someone admitted to the program, they come in knowing that, hey, if I don't pay rent on time, I don't maintain this unit, I'm not going to be here very long. And on the other hand, people are going to feel foolish if they're paying rent when other families are not paying rent and they're still living there. So, it's really a matter of understanding how to work effectively with people. But if you are, this is really a management issue. you're required to do self-monitoring. And one of the things to monitor is what's going on with our collections. How many, how delinquent are some of our families? Why hasn't our collection policy been followed? Why is this family still in this unit? Why do we have accumulation of vacant units awaiting renovation because they were damaged by the previous occupant? And now we have all these empty units with no one living in them. Why we have all these families on the waiting list? This is a snowball kind of scenario because you're not operating effectively. When you admit a family that cannot reasonably expected to pay their required rent, you're creating extra work for yourself and unnecessary expense for your program because of you're not collecting the rent and you have to incur legal costs and staff time in removing that family. Same way with admitting families that aren't taking care of their unit. So this gets into the importance of considering suitability in your selection for participation in your programs, because you want people that are going to be successful. You're establishing what their requirements are. They're accepting those requirements. As Sonia pointed out, they need to have the expectation those requirements are going to be maintained. Let's see, and then the travel policy, if you're traveling, what are eligible travel costs? How is travel approved? How are travel costs compensated? And of course, there's federal restrictions on travel costs that are included in the uniform guidance. Procurement policy. Oh my goodness. We're going to be talking about procurement later, and so much of your money is expended on procurement. You need to be able to document that you exercise procurement activities in a way that is in compliance with federal requirements. And if you don't, that procurement could be deemed to be an ineligible expenditure. So it's not a matter of just going through the correct procurement process, but also documenting you went through that procurement process and having those procurement documents retrievable when it's necessary. Indian preference, we're going to be talking about that as well. Indian preference is required with the NAHASDA funds. We talked a little bit about the acquisition of property that's tied to relocation. And there's, we talked briefly about the specific requirements having to do with the acquisition of real property and the requirements having to do with relocation, either of a temporary or permanent nature. And then drug-free workplace requirements, how cash is being managed. We have, of course, a whole range of financial management policies and procedures. Let's see, we already talked about admission. I just wanted to make the comment that, process for admission is that a family applies and their application is reviewed. At that point in time, there's a determination made that they're eligible, or they appear a preliminary determination that they're eligible, and they go on the waiting list. And that is all. That initial application gets them on the waiting list. What's really important is making selections from the waiting list. You're required to make selections from the waiting list. And the important thing is that selection from the waiting list, because that is when they do enter your program. When you make that selection, you renew or review or reevaluate their eligibility, but also their suitability. So making a determination of eligibility for the purpose of getting on the waiting list is one thing. Making the selection from the waiting list to actually enter your program is quite another. And so, that really needs to be spelled out in your admission occupancy policy. So Sonia talked about occupancy quite a bit yesterday. I don't know, Sonia, do you have anything to add to that in terms of policy issues?
No, that they just need to have strong policies in admission and occupancy, and then stick to them. And everybody needs to know what those policies are and how to screen people for eligibility. And then once they're eligible and selected off the waiting list, how to then go in and figure what their rent or home buyer payment is going to be, like we talked about yesterday, how to figure whether or not they're over income. And if they are, do you have in your IHP that you're going to serve over income people up to 10% of your annual grant? If not, you can't do it. So that has to be an activity in your IHP. So there's lots of things that tie together there with admission. You've got to have third-party verifications of all of their income, and all of that stuff has to be pulled together into a folder. And you need to know what documentation you need for each person, and make sure that when they bring in an application and it's not complete, don't accept an incomplete application, because then you've made a lot of extra work for yourself, because you keep having to go back and say, I still need this, I still need that, I still need this. So if you don't accept it until it's complete, that eliminates that problem. Have that in your policy, that you do not accept incomplete applications. And when they come in and it's not complete, give it back to them and say, when it's completed, bring it back. And then don't take it until it's completed. And that cuts way down on your workload. If you're accepting incomplete applications, you've got another stack over here somewhere where you're having to check back with these people and check back with these people and check back with these people. And so you're wasting valuable time that you don't have to waste if you just put in your policy that you will not accept an incomplete application. With that said, you want to work with your applicants if they're having trouble completing the application, and try to help them as much as possible to get the documentation that they need together so that they've got a complete application. Sometimes they just don't understand what it is that you're wanting. So you need to help them figure out, okay, this is what you need to bring me along with this, or this, in order to have a complete application that we can process and then put you on a waiting list. But don't accept them if they're not completed. I see this so many times when I go out on TA to help people, and they say, well, we've just got so many applications over here that, people keep calling and want to know, have I finished their application? Well, I can't finish it because I don't have all their information, and I keep having to send them letters to tell them what I need. You eliminate that process if you won't accept an incomplete application.
Oh, that's a great comment, Sonia, giving insight about how you structure your policies and procedures to improve your operation, like you're just saying, saving work effectively with people. Staff will know that that's how they're supposed to handle an incomplete application.
Well, we all have limited staffing and limited money for staffing.
Exactly.
We want to be able to utilize them as effectively as possible without adding work that's not necessary, by structuring your policies so that it makes it as simple as possible for both you and the applicant.
That's it. That's a great summary on the purpose of these policies and procedures. to be in compliance, to be effective, and be efficient.
Yep.
And the only way that can be done is by developing what that means for your program. Yes, it is a lot of work to develop this, but once you build these things, evolve over time, and I think Sonia would agree with me. It's pretty apparent when you go into a housing program, you can judge pretty quickly the quality of their policies and procedures. If people have a copy, if you say, I'd like to see your policy and procedures, and there's a copy on every desk, you know that they are operating in a business-like way. If they say, oh, we have those, they're around here somewhere, and they actually have to search for them, you know that in fact, they're just operating by the seat of their pants.
Or they're in a case in a file that is real dusty. When they hand it to you, you realize real quickly that they're not really looking at their policies and procedures as they
should. Right, exactly. Yeah. So again, this is something that certainly should be assessed during self-monitoring, is to say, okay, here's your policy and procedures. Are you following this? Is it complete? Is it out of date? Here's a problem. We have a problem with collections. Here's the policy. Is the policy being followed? Oh, no, it's not. Why is that? Okay, we need to update this policy. We need to train staff on the policy. We need to have management oversight to see the policies followed. That's the natural process. That's the evolutionary process. Go ahead.
The answer I get a lot of times when I ask that question, when I'm out in the field working with people, is, well, our board won't let us do that. Well, if your board won't let you do it, then change your policy so that it matches what your board will let you do. But if they approved your policies that says if you don't get payments for X amount of time, you start eviction procedures, they need to back you up on that. And you need to talk with them and say, hey, look, we have to have these policies. These policies have to be enforceable. And so you need to be backing us up when we try to enforce these policies. And it can't be different for different clients. It has to be uniformly enforced across the board, regardless of who they are or who they're related to.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That's so true. I know when I was executive director, numerous times I had individual board members come in to sit with me to discuss a concern they had. And a lot of times they were unhappy about something that was happening. And I would say, this is why we did it. Here's the policy. And then I would say, if you think the policy should be changed, then I can put it onto the agenda for the next board meeting to discuss this.
Yep.
I think every single time they said, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
I was very clear saying, look, the board establishes policy. It's my job as executive director to implement policy. That's what I'm doing here. So if you think it needs to be changed, great. That requires board action. We can't decide here between myself as executive director and you as a board member to change the policy. My job is to enforce the policy. Your job is to establish the policy. So don't put me in the middle. That everybody understood that, and it really worked well. What that communicates is everybody's treated the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so that board member goes back to their community and says, look, they follow policy. This is why we have the policy. Yep. And you just need to figure out if you want to comply with the policy or not. you know, that's up to you, but there's nothing I can do about it. That's because that's the rule. And then actually that reinforces the role of the board to govern as a governing body, not as individuals that are in a position to play politics in a community. So that I think that strengthens your relationship with the board as well.
Well, and right now that we've got the same requirements for policies through every agency through 2 CFR 200,
Good point.
this is where you go back and say, look, we've got these requirements. They're regulatory. We don't have a choice. We have to put this in a policy because the regulation says we have to have it in a policy. So, you know, if it's in a policy, then we have to enforce that policy. So, you know, you have to start operating like a business. Businesses know, you know, what their bottom line is and what they have to do to be able to be effective and to be able to enforce the policies that they have in place and their standard operating procedures that go along with those policies. So you've got to start looking at that from the standpoint of, you know, my housing entity is a business and I have to run it like a business. I have to have income coming back in that can go back out to help more people. And in order to do that, I've got to enforce my collection policies. And if I'm not enforcing my collection policies, then I've got people sitting on a waiting list that could be being helped because I'm not getting that money coming in. So that's not fair to them. So you have to think of it in these terms as you're going through that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that goes on also with the condition of the units. If you're admitting families that don't take care of their units, you're racking up thousands of dollars of rehab costs, maintenance costs. That is money that would otherwise be available to help other families. So, you know, that's your job, is to manage the resources and to use them in the most effective way to serve your community. And that does require the use of policies.
And that's the best way to run a really good program, is with strong policies that you enforce.
Yes, absolutely. So the program guidance 2002-11 lists 11 types of policies that are required. And then it goes on to talk about other policies that may be required. For example, investment policy. If you have, you do have an option if HUD approves your request to invest funds and HUD approves it based on your management capacity, you can receive a lump sum of your annual allocation from locks, and then you can invest those funds and retain the proceeds of the investment. If you're doing that, then obviously you need to have an investment policy. Another thing is having housing standards. You know, in your annual performance report, you report on the condition of your units. And there's a little chart there in the APR. You identify the types of units, the number of units, and then the units that you inspected, and then you report on the number of units that are in good condition, units that need rehab, and units that need to be replaced. Well, how do you make those determinations? What is your housing standards for a house in satisfactory condition, or a unit in housing in satisfactory condition? What is your definition for a housing unit that needs to be rehabbed or needs to be replaced? So, you know, I think to actually exercise management of housing standards, you need to have a policy that talks about housing standards for your community. And that would vary substantially from one area of the country to another, based on community standards, but also environmental issues, for example, cultural issues, so on and so forth. So I just wanted to mention that, encourage you to think about establishing housing standards. That's something we don't see all that often, but I think that, in terms of creating a stronger management of your property, it's great to have property standards. Okay, well, let's see. The only other thing I wanted to mention is having a disposition policy. When you just need, occasionally, you may have to dispose of some property, be it materials or supplies or equipment or property. How is that done? And so, that's what your disposition policy is for. Other than that, I think we pretty much covered the topic of policies. Are there any questions, comments, discussion before we move on? Okay, I don't see any chats popping up here, so I guess we're ready to move on here. And Sonia, I guess you pick it up here. Did you want to just go on or take a break before we move on to section 8?
What do you think?
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to give
either way, you take a 5-minute break, 10-minute break.
You're gonna have to give me control again after you froze up earlier. I lost
Oh,
control.
yeah, okay.
I
Here you
lost.
are.
Here we go. Okay, so. Okay, there we go. Organizing departments. Do you all want a break? Somebody speak up, or do you want to go on from where we are? Break, somebody says. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll do more frequent, smaller breaks. It's hard to sit in front of a computer and listen to us forever, and we know that. So let's see, it is 43 after the hour right now. Let's come back at 5 till the hour. How's that work?
Sounds good.
Okay. See you
Thanks,
then.
Sonia.
Organizing departments. Some of the requirements are, as David went over very thoroughly, establishing program policies. Who has what function? What do you do within the area that you work in? What are your duties? Do you have desk guides for people to let them know what their duties are and what they should be doing and how they should be following those policies? What type of file management do you have within your different departments? Who's responsible for making sure things get filed and where they get filed and how they're retrievable? This is all very important processes within developing the different departments. So you want to when you're talking about programs and services, define family characteristics if we're talking about an admission and occupancy program. Identify any preferences that you have within your waiting list. Identify the priorities within those preferences and identify areas where services are going to be provided within that department. Establish what your assistance amounts are going to be for different programs and different projects. Establish what minimum rents are if you're going to have minimum rents, but know that you cannot exceed 30% of the adjusted gross income for low income persons because that's statutory. So establishing minimum rents causes you more work because you're constantly having to go back and make sure that you're not exceeding that 30% rule. Identify additional deductions in calculating adjusted gross rent, like we talked about yesterday, where instead of per capita, some of the tribes were giving subsistence during the COVID time, which is different than per capita, but could be used and not counted as part of their income. Your file management requirements, you have to have written procedures for identifying the types of files that you're going to maintain. Your documentation is required for tenant and programmatic files. We talked about earlier today, making sure that your original application showing that they were eligible at the time of admission goes forward anytime you have to add a new file. Also know what manner in which your files are to be retrieved and stored. Are they paper copies? Are they electronic copies? How long are you going to store them? When you're talking about occupancy files, that can be a little different than other files. You want to keep those as long as you have that occupant in your program. So that 3 years that's identified does not follow into your occupancy files. Those tenant files need to stay until that tenant is no longer a part of your program. At the end of that time frame, if you choose, you could keep it for 3 years and then get rid of them. But sometimes those tenants come back into the program and you'll want to know what the old file looked like. So tenant files may be something that you actually want to maintain longer than what you're required to maintain them. The application. Make sure you have a written application for each occupant. It should be time and date stamped when it's received. It should be accepted and processed to determine eligibility. And if your waiting list is closed, you might consider keeping an inquiry list. But staff should help an applicant complete the application, like I talked about earlier, if they're having difficulty doing that. The application should capture all of the family characteristics for the particular family that's applying, what their estimated anticipated income is for the 12 months, what is the appropriate size, location, and type of home for the family. Is it a rental? Is it a home ownership? Are you just going to be doing down payment and closing cost assistance? You need to make sure that you know what they're applying for and that they fit that particular type of application, whether that family is suitable for participation in a housing program in accordance with your local selection criteria. Not everybody's ready for home ownership. Sometimes they may come in and want home ownership, but they may not be suitable for home ownership at the time. Maybe you want to put them in a program that will help them get ready for home ownership, but at the time, they should be in your rental program, not a home ownership program. Whether or not that applicant qualifies for a particular preference, like veterans preference, or maybe elderly preference, or maybe family preference. You can have all different types of preferences, but all of this needs to be in your policies and you need to follow it consistently. On your eligibility screening, you can do criminal background checks. If you do criminal background checks, those need to be kept in a separate file under lock and key, not as part of their tenant file. This is something that no one else should have access to by going and opening a file. You can do landlord references within your eligibility screening. Talk to people where they have lived before. Did they pay their rent on time? Did they keep the property in good condition? You want to look at any outstanding debts that they may have. Do they have the income to pay rent? Do they have the income to pay a house payment? You want to look at any program specific requirements that you may have. Maybe you have a certain requirement that they make X amount of dollars in order to be able to apply for a home ownership project. What is their family composition? You may have a husband, a spouse, or two people cohabitating. Children in the family. You may have aunts and uncles living with them. You may have grandparents living with them. You may have grown children going to school still living with them. What is their tribal enrollment? Do you have a CDIB card requirement? so that you can show that they are part of your tribe or part of another Native American tribe. Do they get preference for being part of your tribe? Or do they get preference for being Native American in another tribe? So these are things you want to look at. You want to look at their credit worthiness, especially if you're looking at doing a home ownership program. Is this going to be their principal residence? Do they have the ability to enter into an agreement of the type that they're wanting to enter into? Are they 18 years old? What is their ability to enter into a binding agreement for home ownership or for rent? What's their maintenance history? What is your verification timeframe, and have they gotten everything into you in a timely manner for you to verify it? Do they have stable employment? Your data collection focuses solely on gathering information from the family. Typically, it's answers to questions that pertain to their eligibility, and the documents should answer each question that's on your application. Are there any questions on the type of things to put into your files for this particular type of setting up a department? You've got all different types of departments. You've got financial departments, you've got admission and occupancy departments, you've got procurement departments, you've got sometimes an environmental department, you have got, based on the types of activities that you're going to undertake with your housing dollars, you have a determination of what are all these different departments, and these departments all need to function together as well as separately. And each department needs to know how they affect other departments by not getting their things into certain areas and in a time frame that is timely. So everybody needs to know, what I do, how it affects what the person sitting over here by me does that may be in another department. So these are things you need to look at when you're establishing departmental guidelines, and when you're looking at how to set up your departments, when you're looking at how to set up your policies. The policies should all flow together from department to department and complement each other. And you should know what the policies are for other departments as well as your own department, so that you know how you affect other people's work or how their work affects you. So these are all things that you want to look at, is the internal workings of your housing entity as a whole. How do all these different departments affect each other? And what do we need to do to make sure that they are all effective and functional together? Are there any questions on establishing policies and departments and knowing what others in your housing entity do and how it affects what you do and how you affect what they do, before we go on to environmental? Any questions at all? If not, we'll start talking a little bit about environmental. Your environmental reviews are required by the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, and the acronym for that is NEPA. You've got choices in the Indian Housing Block Grant Program to either do your environmental review under 24 CFR Part 50, where the tribes request HUD to retain the review responsibility, or 24 CFR Part 58, where tribes assume the review responsibility. One thing you need to know is that if you go with 24 CFR Part 50, this does not alleviate your requirement to gather all of the information that HUD's going to need to look at and make that review of the environmental. HUD themselves does not gather that information. You're still responsible under 24 CFR Part 50 for gathering all the information. It falls under a form called HUD 4128, and you are required to gather all that information and submit it to HUD, then HUD reviews it, and HUD then would be responsible for saying, yes, that this meets the guidelines of NEPA, and that if it's challenged, then HUD is the one that they challenge it to. Under 24 CFR, the tribe assumes that responsibility. And if that particular environmental review is challenged, then the tribe is responsible for complying. Okay, so when is an environmental review performed? It must be completed prior to the commitment of any funds. That's the very, very first thing you need to remember on environmental reviews. It doesn't matter whether or not it's HUD funds, another entity's funds, the tribe's funds, whose funds it is. But if you're using those funds in any way, shape, or form with IHBG dollars, it must be completed prior to the commitment of any fund. So you can't say, well, the tribe's paying for this, so we can go ahead and do this. That doesn't work. If it's part of the project, then you must complete the environmental review prior to the commitment of any of those funds. The environmental review references are 1000.18, what environmental review requirements apply. And it specifies the environmental review requirements that apply in the regulations for IHBG. The next is 1000.20. Is an Indian tribe required to assume environmental review responsibilities? The answer to that for Indian Housing Block Grant is no. If you're doing an Indian community development block grant, then the answer to that is yes, because the regulations for ICDBG, which is Indian Community Development Block Grant, require that the tribe assume the responsibility for environmental review under Part 58. It doesn't require it under the IHBG program. You get the option, but once again, remember that it does not alleviate you from having to pull together all of the information the same as you would have to do under Part 58. The only difference is HUD would have to review it and HUD would be responsible. It's going to take you longer to do one under Part 50 because you don't know when HUD's going to have the opportunity to do that review and submit that information back to you. And so you get that choice, and most tribes do choose Part 58 so that they retain that responsibility because it goes faster for them. Under 1000.21, it wants to know under what circumstances are waivers of the environmental review procedures available to tribes. Well, you don't want to get to the point where you have to request a waiver of the environmental review procedures, because in order to get a waiver of the environmental review procedures, it has to go through 3 cabinet level heads in Washington, D.C. It has to go through the Secretary of CPD, which is Community Property Development, because they're responsible for all environmental at CPD. It has to go through the Secretary of Public and Indian Housing, and then the Secretary of the Indian Housing Program Secretary as well, and be signed off on. And it has to go through the legal department in Washington, D.C., the head of legal, in order to get an environmental waiver. A waiver is only approved if you can show that the reason that you didn't follow the environmental review requirements the way that you were supposed to was out of your control, and that there was no degradation to the environment as a result of that. And all of the environmental review that you should have done correctly has to be done correctly before it can be submitted as a waiver. I'm going to give you an example of something that this actually happened when I was the Director of Grants Management for the Southern Plains Office of Native American Programs. We had a tribe that got their Indian Housing Block Grant money, and they were going to do a development. I don't remember how many units were in the development, but it was a $3.5 million development project. Well, as part of that development project, they were working with Indian Health Services, and Indian Health Services said, do you want us to do your environmental review for you? We can do that if you want. They said, sure. So Indian Health Services did their environmental review. Well, guess what? Indian Health Services doesn't have the same environmental review requirements that HUD has. HUD has more stringent environmental review requirements. Under Indian Health Services environmental review requirements, infrastructure is not something that they're required to do a full-blown environmental review on. It is considered I'm just blank at the moment. Help, David.
I don't know.
Well, I do know, but I'm blank at the moment. Dadgummit. Hang on.
Exempt?
It's considered an exempt activity. Thank you. Geez. Okay. It's not exempt under HUD's requirements. And so HUD went out and did a review of this project, and they asked to see their environmental review record. Well, when they showed them that it was determined to be exempt, they had done the wrong level of environmental review under 24 CFR Part 58. They should have had to have done a full-blown environmental review where they did the statutory checklist, sent out all the letters to all the agencies, got them all back, then done a publication showing that they had a finding of no significant impact, and submit all of that to HUD and get back a document from HUD that showed that they had done everything the way they were supposed to. They didn't do that. So all of the money that they had spent on that project was now due back to the project unless they could get a waiver of that environmental review procedure. Well, I worked with them on that process for almost a year before we managed to get all three agency heads to sign off on that, showing that it wasn't done intentionally, that they thought that since IHS had volunteered to do it, that theirs was the same as HUD's, even though it wasn't. But even though it wasn't the same, that there had been no degradation to the environment, and that everything would have been okay had they followed that procedure and done it like they were supposed to. And they had now done that and showed that there was a finding of no significant impact, and they should have been able to get a release of funds. So it's critical that you know the level of environmental review that you need to do under HUD's environmental review requirements, not another agency's requirements, because they're not all the same. So don't make that mistake and end up having to request a waiver, because had they not been able to get that waiver approved, they owed back $3.5 million to the program from other than federal funds. Where do you get $3.5 million that you don't have to pay back? Well, guess what? It would have come out of future IHBG grants. Their grants would have been reduced by the amount of $3.5 million until that money was paid back. So don't put yourself into that circumstance where you have to request a review, or where you have to request a waiver for not doing the correct level of environmental review. Then it goes on to 1000.22, are the cost of environmental reviews an eligible cost? Yes, they are an eligible cost. And then 1000.24, if an Indian tribe assumes environmental review responsibility, how will HUD assist the tribe in performing the environmental review? Well, if the tribe assumes that responsibility, HUD doesn't assist the tribe in performing that review. They're responsible for doing all of that and documenting that they've done it correctly, submitting the finding of no significant impact to HUD, waiting for the prescribed time periods until they get back that release of environmental from them, which is a document that HUD will, you send a document into HUD, HUD sends a document back to you saying that you have met that requirement. So the 24 CFR Part 58, they don't assist you with that. Under Part 50, they do, because they look at that and they see all the documentation that you've done and say, yes, you've done the correct level of environmental review. Now we can sign off on this environmental review. So you've got several relative laws and authorities that are found in 24 CFR Part 58.5. That's the NEPA process requires that you look at all the laws and related authorities that address the environment. clean air, clean water, your land, your flora, your fauna, your human health and safety. These are all entities that you have to send letters to make sure that you're in compliance with all of them. And this is called a statutory checklist. And all of these are found in 24 CFR 58.5. You also have all proposals for federal actions that have the potential to affect the quality of the human environment, natural and physical, as well as social and economic, and federal actions that include funding and insuring, such as loan guarantees and program income. There is no trigger level amount before you have to do an environmental review. All levels of funding are covered, like David said earlier. If you're doing something using IHBG funds, you need an environmental review, even if it is for exempt activities. You need something that says these activities are exempt and we're going to undertake them with these dollars, and that needs to be placed in the file as an environmental review record. Then you also, in addition to exempt activities, have major relevant laws and authorities like we just talked about under 24 CFR 58.5. You have to know whether or not there are any sole source aquifers in the area that you're undertaking the activity. Are there any endangered species? So you have to check with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on that. Are we doing something that could affect an endangered species? This comes into play a lot of times depending on where you are. I have dealt with red-cockaded woodpeckers habitat on environmental reviews before, where the tribe had to actually move a project because they were disturbing the habitat of the red-cockaded woodpecker, who is an endangered species and a protected species, so they could not do the project in that particular area. You've got a North American black burrowing beetle that is the same way. They're a protected species. If you're in the habitat of that particular North American black burrowing beetle, then you've got to move your project. You have a prairie mole cricket that's a protected species. There's all different types of species. You also have botanic species that are protected. There's a hooded fringed orchid that's basically a weed, but it's a protected species. You can't disturb that particular species with your project. So you've got to know what these are. You've got to send these letters to these agencies and get back what they call a no effect finding on the letter that you submit them. You've got Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So are you affecting a wild and scenic river with your project? You've got the Clean Air Act. You've got the Farmland Protection Policy Act. There's certain particular farmlands that are protected farmlands, and you've got to know that you're not disturbing those. You have the National Historic Preservation Act, so that you need to know whether or not those historic structures and archaeological sites could be within the area. Sometimes you get back a letter from the National Historic Preservation Act or National Archaeological Agency that says they want you to have an archaeological survey done of that particular area before they'll stamp it no effect finding. Well, sometimes when you do have somebody come out and do that archaeological survey, they may find that there are significant pottery shards or arrowheads or different things within that site where these tribes migrated in particular areas that could have an impact. And so they're going to require you to move your project someplace else sometimes. So there's lots and lots of things that come into play. You've got the Clean Water Act, you've got wetlands, and you've got the Coastal Zone Management Act if you happen to be in a coastal zone. So you've got to send letters to all these agencies, and all of these letters, when you put them together on what's called a statutory checklist, have to come back to you with a stamp on them that says no effect finding. If they come back saying you have to do something in order to be in compliance with that particular agency, you've got to do whatever it says you need to do, like doing an archaeological survey, or if you're in an area that has an endangered species in that area, you're going to have to choose a different location for your project that does not disturb the habitat of that endangered species. You've got other requirements in 24 CFR under 58.6 that you're never exempt from. You always have to look to see if you're in a flood disaster protection area. And That means, are you in a 100-year flood zone or a 500-year flood zone? If you are, then is there flood insurance coverage available in that area? If there's not flood insurance coverage available in that area, you may have to move that particular project elsewhere, because you cannot build in a flood area without having flood insurance coverage. Your Coastal Barrier Resource Act is something that you're never exempt from, and runway clear zones under 24 CFR Part 51 Subpart D, you have to make sure that you're not in a runway clear zone for an airport. You have limits on the activities that you can undertake prior to getting this clearance. Neither a recipient nor participant can commit or expend HUD funds prior to receiving HUD approval of their certification unless the activity is exempt or categorically excluded, not subject to that statutory checklist. That means not subject to all those agencies that we just talked about. And those are normally activities that are just money exchange activities, like tenant-based rental assistance, that type of thing. You've got a list of all of these different activities that are exempt, that fall under categorically excluded, not subject to that statutory checklist, or fall under categorically excluded, subject to that checklist, or that require you to do a full-blown environmental review. So the participant must include public and private, nonprofit or for-profit entities or their contractors in this as well. So neither a recipient nor participant can commit or expend non-HUD funds, even local dollars, on an activity prior to approval if the activity would have an adverse environmental impact or limit the choice of reasonable alternatives. So one of the things you always have to look at is, okay, is there an alternative to doing it in this location if it is going to have something that would have an impact on the environment? Recipients considering applications from prospective subrecipients or beneficiaries must ensure that actions are not taken prior to receiving HUD approval. So the commitment does not include, and therefore is okay to make, a statement of funding reservation for an Indian housing plan or an ICDBG application, or a non-legally binding agreement like an option agreement. So if you're going to be purchasing land, you can do what's considered an option agreement, or money that would hold that land until you had the environmental review clearance. And that would be, you'd have to be subject to an approved environmental clearance on that. For land acquisition projects, an option agreement to purchase that land is allowable prior to HUD approval only if it is subject to a determination of environmental desirability and the option payment is of a nominal amount. One exception is when it's required by 24 CFR Part 42, relocation funds may be committed before approval of that certification. So if you're relocating somebody, you can use those relocation funds prior to that approval of the certification. So are there any questions on environmental? This was just a very, very, very brief overview of environmental. An actual environmental review class, there is a, and I'm not kidding you, 4-inch manual that goes with a 3-day environmental review class. When you're actually having to do environmental reviews in your office, whoever's responsible for that needs to make sure that they have had proper training and that they know what the correct level of environmental review is, and that they undertake the correct level of environmental review, because that's the one area, like I said to start with, that you owe money back unless you can get a waiver of that environmental review process if you do the wrong level of environmental review. This is the most critical thing that you do as far as not committing funds until you've done the proper level of environmental review. So someone needs to know how to do that. Normally, and I am not kidding you at all, someone trying to learn the environmental review process has to go take a full-blown environmental review class, a minimum of 3 times before a light bulb goes off and they go, oh, I finally think I understand how to do this process. It's difficult. That's the best thing I can tell you. Doing environmental reviews is difficult. Make sure someone is properly trained in your office to do them. The only person that can be responsible for signing off on their environmental review is the tribe. You as a housing entity cannot be an environmental can't do the environmental certification. It has to be the tribe. It has to be the chief executive officer of the tribe, whatever that tribe chief executive officer is, and they can only designate that to another member of the tribal council if they choose to do that. There's a, and I don't know the name or don't know the number of the guidance on that, David. Do you? I'll have to look that up in a minute when you start the development process. I will look up the guidance that specifies that it has to be the chief executive officer of the tribe that signs off on it.
Sonja, if I could interrupt you for 1 second, we have a question. It says, what if we're doing a project within city limits?
It doesn't matter where you're doing the project. All of their environmental review requirements are the same, regardless of where the project is. If it's within the city limits, if it's on a reservation, if it's out in the country, it does not matter where that project is located. The environmental review requirements are exactly the same, regardless of where you're developing the project. Environmental is critical.
And that's because the requirement ties to the money.
Yes.
The authorization to use federal funds requires, prior to the use of those funds or commitment of federal funds, requires that environmental review.
And your
requirements
actual
be
Indian
addressed.
housing.
So it doesn't have to do with the local government, it has to do with the source of your funding.
Yes. Your actual Indian housing grant agreement for the funding is subject to environmental clearance. And so therefore, when you sign that agreement, you're saying, I will follow all of the environmental review requirements because it's statutory that I do that. And so this is why you have to submit these documents to HUD, and HUD has to send you back a clearance on that and saying, we're releasing this requirement for you on this money. Now you can draw down these funds. There is nothing that I can tell you other than this is the most critical process that you do is environmental, because it's the one process that you owe the money back if you do it wrong. And it's not easy to get a waiver. Trust me, I've been there, done that. It is not easy. It's not fun. And you're going to have a lot of unhappy people when you're having to pay back all these funds from other than federal sources in order to be able to comply, because you didn't comply with the environmental review process like you were supposed to up front. So I cannot stress how critical this is. Whoever's responsible for this in your entity needs to go to environmental review training. They need to understand it, or you need to hire someone to do your environmental reviews that is 100% proficient in doing them correctly, following the rules. Are there any other questions on that? That was just
I might make it.
Super brief overview of environmental. Doesn't even begin to tap into what you need to know to do an environmental review.
I might make a comment about that question. What if we're doing a project within city limits? Of course, the city may have environmental rules that you would have to comply with. If you're working within your jurisdiction, I mean, that's a separate matter. But I'm just saying that, you know, if you're, there may be any, who knows what kind of environmental laws there are, in addition to what we're talking about, the under NEPA, and the requirements of the source of funding. There may be additional requirements in the local jurisdiction that you're working in.
Absolutely. And you have to meet the most stringent of the requirements, which normally are 24 CFR Part 50 or Part 58. But if someone else has more stringent requirements than that, and you're using any of their funding, or you're having to be permitted by them, then you've got to follow their requirements as well if they happen to be more stringent than HUD's requirements. You always have to follow, when you're combining funds of any kind, the most stringent requirement of your funding that you have. Do we want to take another little break before you start the development process? Because that one is a really long one and very involved.
Yeah, I wanted to, yesterday during the introduction, we took a look at some of the resources in the digital library. And we did a real quick look, and there were environmental review documents included in that digital library.
Yes.
One of the things we looked at is the one-page
The statutory checklist. Oh, no, you're
well,
talking about the different levels of environmental.
yeah, the levels of environmental review. I was wondering if if we should take a moment and go back and look at that.
If everybody
If
wants
any
to, we
interest
certainly
in doing
can.
that.
Like I said,
I know
there's
that
nothing-
one page on the levels of environmental review is kind of the starting point for me.
I agree.
And even like a planning activity, obviously anything you're doing is going to have costs involved with it. And so, before you start a new activity, it's good to look at that chart of level of environmental review to understand what you need to do in order to address the environmental requirements, because all expenditures require some action. Even administrative expenditures require some level of environmental review, in which may be only the acknowledgement that it is an exempt activity. But technically, you should have a memo in the file saying these administrative activities are exempt.
David, also within those documents, you've got 4 different separate documents. One is for exempt activities. One is for categorically excluded, not subject to the 58.5 requirements. One is categorically excluded, subject to them, and the other is all other activities. That are 4 different documents that they can utilize as their environmental review record if they choose to do that, as long as they have done everything required of that particular document. And those are part of what you had yesterday too. We might want to go pull those up separately.
Yeah, so should we just take a moment to do that?
Sure.
Okay.
I think that would be really beneficial. Environmental review is just so critical.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
And we have the time to do it. So let's do that.
Yeah, right. Okay, let me locate that.
If we could pull up those 4 individual documents, it goes down the list of what falls within those parameters on each of those 4 separate documents.
Right. Oh, there we go. That's not it. I hadn't planned on doing this, so I have to see if it's
No, but
located here.
I think it's a great idea to do it, David.
I'll tell you what, let's, why don't we take a 5-minute break here and I'll get it pulled up.
Okay, that's awesome.
Okay.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Okay, I'll just say we're taking a 5-minute break.
Okay.
Okay. Terrific.
Thank you. Materials. In your list of materials, each of you have these documents. And these are real simplified documents that let you know what level of environmental review that you need to do. If it is an exempt activity, it would be environmental and other studies, resource identification, development of plans and strategies, information and financial services, administration and management activities, public services that will not have a physical impact or result in physical changes, such as prevention, childcare, health, drug abuse, education, counseling, energy conservation, welfare, recreation, inspection and testing of properties for hazards and defects, purchase of insurance, purchase of tools, engineering and design costs, technical assistance and training, temporary or permanent improvements that do not alter environmental conditions and are limited to activities to protect, repair, or arrest the effects from disasters, imminent threats, or physical deterioration, payments of principal and interest on loans or obligations guaranteed by HUD. If you're doing any of these activities, you would just do your little check marks over here out to the side on this particular document. And then down at the bottom, if you'll go a little bit further, there's a place for the reviewer's name and signature and date. And this would then go in your file as your written environmental review record showing that this is an exempt activity and I can spend money for this based on it being an exempt activity. Then your next level goes to your environmental review record number 2, which is all, if you remember me telling you that everything is subject to 24 CFR Part 56. So this is the project in an area identified as having special flood hazards, yes or no? And does the community participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, yes or no? And does the property owner have flood insurance, yes or no? And then it says if the answer to the either question is no, the project is not in compliance, and otherwise proceed to question 2. Okay, question 2 is the project in a coastal barrier zone, yes or no? If the answer is yes, then you've got compliance that you've got to do. And if not, then you move on to the next, which is the project in an airport clear zone, yes or no? If yes, has the buyer acknowledged in writing that he or she is aware of the implications of being in a clear zone, yes or no? So if the answer to question 3 is no, the project's not in compliance and you have to obtain this acknowledgement in writing before proceeding with the environmental review. So you always have to answer these 3 questions on every project that you're doing. Then you've got an environmental review record number 3. And this one is categorically excluded, not subject to the statutory checklist. So these are activities, remember I told you they're basically like money exchange activities, like tenant-based rental assistance and supportive services like healthcare, housing services, permanent housing placement, daycare, nutritional services, short-term payments for rent, mortgage, utility costs, assistance in gaining access to government benefits and services, operating costs like maintenance, security, operations, utilities, furnishings, equipment, supplies, staff training and recruitment, or economic development activities like equipment purchases, inventory financing, interest subsidies, operating costs, other expenses or not associated with construction or expansion, activities to assist home ownership of existing or dwelling units under construction not assisted with federal funds, closing costs, down payment cost assistance, interest buy downs or other actions resulting in transfer of title, affordable housing pre-development costs like legal consulting, developer and other on-site costs, project financing, administrative costs for loan commitments and zoning approvals and other activities that don't have a physical impact. These are all things that are basically just administrative or money exchange activities, and you don't have to comply with 24 CFR 58.5 if you're undertaking these activities. So you would check mark what that activity is and show this as your written environmental review record. Then your next level is those that are subject to 58.5. So this is your categorically excluded activities that are subject to 58.5. Any acquisition, repair, improvement, reconstruction, or rehabilitation of public facilities and improvements other than buildings, when the facilities and improvements are in place, facilities are retained for the same use, change in facility size or capacity does not exceed 20%, or there is no replacement of water or sewer lines or reconstruction of curbs and sidewalks or repaving of streets. Special projects directed toward the removal of material and architectural barriers that restrict the mobility of and accessibility of the elderly and handicapped. Residential buildings, 1 to 4 units, where the unit density is not increased beyond 4 units, the land use is not changed, and the building footprint is not increased in a floodplain or in a wetland. Residential buildings of 1 to 4 units where the unit density is not increased by more than 4 units, the land use is not changed, and the building footprint is not increased. Multifamily residential buildings, unit density does not change more than 30%. The project does not involve changes in land use from residential to non-residential. The estimated cost of the rehab is less than 70% of the total estimated cost of replacement after rehab. Non-residential structures, commercial, industrial, and public buildings, facilities, and improvements are in place, will not be changed in size or capacity by more than 20%. The activity does not involve a change in land use from non-residential to residential, commercial to industrial, or one industrial use to another. Another individual action on up to 4 dwelling units where there is a maximum of 4 units in any one site. The units can be 4 1-unit buildings or 1 4-unit building or any combination in between. An individual action on a project of 5 or more housing, units developed on scattered sites when the sites are more than 2,000 feet apart and there are not more than 4 housing units on any one site. Acquisition including leasing or disposition of or equity loans on an existing structure or acquisition, including leasing of vacant land, provided that the structure or land acquired, financed, or disposed of will be retained for the same use, or a combination of the above activities. So any of these activities that you undertake require you to do the statutory checklist, which if you go further down, David, I think that's what's next.
Nope.
It was back up in the previous one. So any of these activities require you to do a statutory checklist. When you do a statutory checklist, you can at some point determine that there's no requirement that would cause you to have to do a further review or to do a publication of finding of no significant impact. And at that point, it flips over and converts to exempt. But these are your statutory checklists that he's going through right now under the environmental assessment, so that you have to do letters to all the different agencies and get back a stamp, like I told you earlier, of no effect finding. And if what you're doing does not fall into any of these categories, then you have to do this document that David is scrolling through right now, which is an actual environmental assessment, and come up with a finding of no significant impact and do a publication of finding of no significant impact, and a request for release of funds from HUD. So it's a really involved process. It needs to be undertaken by somebody that really knows what they're doing on environmental, that can make sure that you're doing the correct level based on everything we just went through. If it didn't fall into any of those 3 environmental review record categories that we just looked at, it requires you to do the full assessment and have a finding of no significant impact and request release of funds from HUD. And there are processes you have to go through to do that. There's like, once you've got that all put together, you have to wait 15 days from the date of your publication for objections to that release of funds or objections to your finding of no significant impact. Then you send it to HUD, and HUD has to wait 15 days from the date they receive it for any objection to the release of funds before they can release your requirement that is on your grant agreement and say, yes, you may release those funds now. So like I said, it's a very involved process that takes somebody who knows exactly what they're doing to keep you out of trouble on environmental. Do you have any other input on that, David? This was real good, and thank you for going back through that. Does anybody have questions based on what we have just gone through?
So, yeah, there's various levels of environmental assessment or environmental review, starting with the simplest, which is exempt, and then going all the way up to environmental impact assessment. That's the highest one, right, Sonia?
Yes, an environmental impact statement is the highest level.
Yeah.
I don't know of any tribe ever going to that level of an environmental impact statement. An environmental impact statement is usually something that gets that is done by cities and states when they're doing big highway projects and that type of thing. What impact is this project going to have on all of the environment around it based on all of the things going into that? It takes years to do an environmental impact statement, and lots of publications and lots of different compliance from different agencies. And so normally, if you come to the level of it's going to require an environmental impact statement, you want to make a change in what you're doing on that project. We don't have the expertise nor the time to do environmental impact statements normally within our projects that we're doing with the dollars that we have.
We have a question from Jacqueline Landlord. When the ERR is complete, does it need to be posted in a public place for a certain amount of time?
Okay, your environmental review record is a written environmental review record. Okay, if you have to do a full environmental assessment, then that has to be published in a newspaper of general circulation or posted. There are different requirements for publications and posting. If it's published, you've got a 15-day waiting period. If it's posted, you've got an 18-day waiting period. All of this is explained within 24 CFR 58, Part 58 or Part 50 on all of these different timeframes. But this class doesn't actually have time to go into all of your requirements of environmental reviews. I highly recommend, if you need to know all of this, that you take the next class offered for environmental reviews and go through that full-blown 3-day environmental review class with the 4-inch manual. Because like I said, this is just a very brief overview of what you need to know. And yes, you do have to do either a publication or a posting based on, what's in the regulations. And then you have to follow, if you do a posting, you've got to send stuff out to all different types of agencies. So most people do a publication instead of a posting so that they don't have to send it out to all of these different agencies to make sure that nobody has any objections. So, like I said, environmental is difficult. That's the best I can tell you on that. And you need to make sure that somebody is well trained that is doing your environmentals for you. And that when you submit this to your environmental certification officer at the tribe, that you've got it done the way it's supposed to be done, so that you're not putting them in any jeopardy of having to defend this environmental review record in court, because that's what they're stating under 24 CFR Part 58, is that we will defend this environmental review record in a court of law if we have to, if somebody challenges it. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your certifying officer, which is the chief executive officer of your tribe, unless they designate another person on their council to be that chief executive officer for environmental. And like I said, I will look up that guidance that tells you, that it has to be the chief executive officer. And David, if you want to go ahead and start, I'll find that and then tell everybody what that is.
Yeah, sure. So some levels of environmental review require a statutory checklist and some don't. But where you have to do the statutory checklist, this is what that it is. So if you have to do a statutory checklist, you have to look at historic preservation, floodplain management, wetland protection, coastal zone management, Endangered Species Act, Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, air quality, farmland protection policy, environmental justice, noise abatement, so on and so forth. This is what you have to do. And then these documents are environmental assessment. We won't get into that detail here. Like Sonia said, this isn't a training on environmental assessment, just to make you aware of what the requirement for the environmental assessment is, the importance of identifying the levels, and doing the necessary review based on the level required for your activity. And I'm going to show you this levels of environmental review. It's such a useful little tool here. This one here. So I would suggest you print this out. If you have anything to do with environmental review, print this out. You can see here's this is just a quick reference sheet for getting a handle on what level of environmental review you need to do. So here, the first column is exempt and lists down the type of things. Exempt is very simple to do. Sonia showed you the form you could use to document your determination that it's exempt. You can see this involves a lot of planning activities, inspections, so on and so forth. And then the next one is categorically excluded, not subject to statutory checklist. Category excluded, not subject to 58.5. And then type of activities subject to 58.5. That is not subject to the statutory checklist, and those that are. And then we move on to the environmental assessment.
Okay, David, I found what I was looking for.
Oh, so quick.
Yeah, it is guidance 2017-03. And what it says on your certifying officer is the certifying officer can only be the tribal leader or other officer of the responsible entity tribe. Thus, delegation is only possible to an officer of the responsible entity tribe. An officer must be someone employed by the tribe, and an employee of a tribally designated housing entity cannot be delegated certifying officer responsibility because TDHEs are not a department of a tribe. In order for a delegate to be considered the certifying officer, the delegate must provide evidence of a delegation, and the delegation can be made in the form of a formal written delegation from the tribal leader or a resolution from the tribal legislative body. The delegation must have specific language in order to comply with 24 CFR Part 58, and the delegation should address whether Persons acting in the position of the delegate have authority to sign as a certifying officer, and a model written delegation from a tribal leader that includes a specific required language is attached to this guidance. So this is something you need to be well aware of, is that the only person who can be the certifying officer for you is the tribal leader, unless they've delegated that to another officer of the tribe. And it cannot be somebody who is a officer or a TDHE. It can't be delegated down to the TDHE.
Mhm.
It's real critical that you have the correct certifying officer signature on your environmental documents. So that again is guidance 2017-03, if you need to know that when you go back to your offices.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sonia. And then down here in the bottom, it talks about the documentation you need for example, you use the ERR guide number 1 and 2, and it notes here that you always have to do those 3 under HUD rules. You have to address these 3 components for all levels: National Flood Insurance, Coastal Barrier Resource Act, and runway clear zones. So this is a great just quick reference to see where the activity is going to fall in. And that's very helpful for planning purposes.
Yes.
So, you're talking about time. How much time is it going to take? Because you have to complete the environmental review before you commit or expend funds. So, how much time is that going to take? And that may be something that you need to do. And you're going to lose a seasonal opportunity to actually do the work. So, time is, depending on the environment you're working in, that time element can be a big deal.
And once you send these letters out to these different agencies, they've got 30 days to respond to you. So you've got a minimum of 30 days. That doesn't count your mailing time, getting it ready, getting it back, putting it all together, making sure that you've got that no effect finding on all of the letters. It's a complex process, and it's a time-consuming process.
And, record keeping is very critical here. Keeping all your documents together to show that you did what was needed, and have that I don't know, have you ever, what are there any special record keeping requirements for ERR documents? Is that still subject to the 3-year rule? Sonia, do you know offhand?
I'd have to look at 58.5 to answer that. I used to know that answer, David, but I have forgotten. Yes, you are required to keep those documents, and as long as you're expending money on a project that this covers, you've got to keep it. You can go back and recertify. There's so much stuff that goes into environmental reviews that we don't get into. You can go back and recertify an old environmental review record that it's still valid and blah, 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 and different things. So then it would just move forward, and you wouldn't get rid of it. But there's a lot that goes into it. And, like I said, they really, really need to take environmental review classes, environmental classes, if they're going to be doing environmental reviews, because it's critical.
I just wanted to bring up that record keeping issue because occasionally it happens that the environmental record is just not retrievable, and that puts all the expenditures for whatever that activity was potentially ineligible.
Yeah.
So having a way of keeping all the documents organized in a file, and then having that complete file available for review is really critically important, because the risk is so high. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll just go ahead and proceed on to the next part of the PowerPoint. Anything on the chat coming up? Okay. All right, so I'm going to switch back over to the PowerPoint right now. Okay, I'm going to start talking about the development process. So what we're really talking about is a logical process for development, and for training purposes, we're using these 5 steps. And you know, for any training on planning, you know, the process really is the same, but different terms can be used here. So this is the model we're using for this particular presentation. And the process starts with an idea and ends in operations. And so we have to plan for the entire development, not just for the construction itself, but also for operations as well. And we'll talk about each of these steps. Just wanted to make a comment that this is not, this is a dynamic, linear process. As you go through planning, sometimes there's taking a step back and reconsidering what was decided previously as you get more information. So as you get more information, you have greater insight, you can make better decisions, and sometimes you have to go back and reconsider, make revisions, and then move forward again. Sometimes you have to set things aside for until things are addressed, like maybe the environmental review, for example. But each stage includes certain goals and objectives, and developing of different products that feed into the development process. Part of the process is gathering data, and that data informs your decision making. It informs your understanding of the need and how to address the need. It informs the decision about who needs to be on your team, and so on and so forth. So it's a dynamic, non-linear process, and there are overlaps, and you know, there's some movement in between the process. Also, this takes a substantial period of time to go through this process, and how much time just depends on what you're doing, how challenging it is, you know, is this something you've done before, so you have a base to work from, or something brand new that you're completely unfamiliar with. But you know, it is a lengthy process to go from having an idea to actually being in operations. But certainly before you actually initiate a project, in other words, start implementation of a project, I'll put it that way, implementation, you want to make sure that you have a commitment from your governing body, that you have input from the staff, and you feel confident that the project is in fact feasible. Does it make sense? Does it make sense for your community? Does it make sense for your organization? That there's financing available. It's the priority use of funding. That you have identified the housing market that this activity is going to serve, and you understand the needs of that market, and you're confident that your plans reflect mitigation of those needs. And it's going to provide the desired outcomes for your community. Also, that it's feasible in terms of overcome barriers. So legal barriers, availability of land, transportation requirements, infrastructure requirements, so on and so forth. Always have to be mindful about consuming your resources, because your resources are limited. The way you use resources affect the community. And so you don't want to make large commitments without being confident about the feasibility of the project. And so as we move down this development process, the costs become greater and greater. Initially, we're just dealing with ideas. And of course, there's not a whole lot of costs involved there other than time. So you might have a concept for an activity or a project or a program that you're thinking about for years, trying to figure out how to make it work, trying to understand how it can be, a concept can become feasible. And so let's start talking about the conceptual process. Well, really need to start, I think, with developing an understanding of the community and the status of the community and what the community desires its future to be. So what's your starting point? Some communities already have community plans, and they have basically a community plan that designates housing areas, and they have infrastructure plans, they have plans for roads, so on and so forth. Well, if that's the case, it's a matter of gathering those things up and reviewing them, getting to understand those, and then identifying how you can fit whatever it is that you're planning into those existing community plans. Some communities may have nothing. And so, you just need to figure out what's my starting point? You might start by doing a needs assessment. Because you don't have there isn't a good needs assessment for your community having to do with housing. That would be a good place to start. To really saying, what are the needs in our community? We've been providing, essentially we've been doing the same thing since NAHASDA started. We have a low rent program, we have a mutual help program, but now that I understand, we have all these other opportunities under NAHASDA. Maybe we can look at other needs in the community beyond subsidized rental program and a lease to own program. And to really get a better depth of understanding, you want to do a needs assessment. And then once you identify priority needs, then you can start thinking about, well, what is the best way of addressing those priority needs? What type of project would would that be? What is the preferred location based on the needs of that population? Who am I really targeting in terms of occupants? Is it workforce housing? Is it families with young children? Is it elderly families, disabled families, families that just need basic shelter, transitional housing, on and on and on. And this ties directly into the definition of eligible affordable housing activities. And you know, in earlier today, I talked about the program guidance 2010-03 that gives a lot of insight about the eligible activities under the different activity categories. But this notice also talks about what housing is. And so under the Housing Act of 1937, pre-NAHASDA, we thought we could only think about housing in terms of subsidized rental units or the lease-to-own mutual help program. But you know, this notice says right from the beginning, it says housing includes rental housing. That may be single family units, multifamily units, single room occupancy, attached units such as duplex and triplex, home ownership housing, group homes for persons with special needs such as elderly or disabled, congregate housing, transitional housing, halfway housing, domestic violence shelters, homeless emergency shelters. So you can see here that under NAHASDA, the definition of program housing is much more broad than it was under the Housing Act of 1937. So you have, when you talk about understanding the needs of the community in terms of housing, right? Your focus is housing. So what are the housing needs in your community? You're not just talking about apartments and houses. You're talking about many different types of housing based on the needs of different parts of the population living in your community. Okay, so conceptual process is just a preliminary evaluation, gathering information. Well, you know, if here's an idea, what would that look like? How much would it cost to build something like this? What kind of challenges is involved in doing that? To get a better understanding of how something might work, you might go and visit similar projects. That's so informative. That can give you so much insight about how a successful project similar to what you're thinking about can be developed and operated, and what the costs are involved with that. What are the challenges involved with that? What are the partnerships involved with that? So you're developing this vision, this concept about what you want to do. And you know, as you gather that information, you gather that data, and you do your analysis, you're working towards making a decision. Is this something that's worth pursuing at this point? If not, you just set it aside. That doesn't mean you can't come back to it. But you know, you decide, well, not yet. There's higher priorities, or we're in the middle of something that diminishes the resources we have to pursue this at this particular point in time. But it's also important to involve the community, and certainly the tribal government. You don't want to get out in front of the tribal government, you know, the ultimate authority in your community for what happens. And you want to make sure your planning process is open to input. Number one is it gives you a much broader understanding of the issues. You are limited in your view, and that's not to diminish the importance of your understanding and point of view, but you know, we all have focuses. Your focus is on housing, and other parts of the community have different points of view, and you want to understand where they're coming from about priorities and how to address those priorities. Involving the community and the local governing authorities in your planning process gives it credibility. Otherwise, it just looks like, well, where did this come from? You know, why did you go out on your own and come up with this idea that no one ever heard of before? So you really want to build credibility for your planning process by involving the community and other organizations, including you know, the government, local government. Other ways of getting insight and to provide a basis to make your plan more credible is gathering data and analyzing that data. The census data, for example, readily available. You can so much data, it can be downloaded off the United States Census for your particular tribe. You know, with a click of a button. You know, not only does that give you data to assist you in your analysis, but that data is official federal data. And of course, there's other data sources as well. You have a tremendous amount of data in your files. You've been operating a housing program for half a century. You know, no one has better data than you do about affordable housing and the people that need assistance with affordable housing, with your 50 years of experience, your waiting list, your income information, your demographic information, just from your files. And hopefully you have, well, perhaps you have, like, you use HDS or some other data management tool in your program, and that can actually be used to generate reports. Also, interface with other organizations, other agencies, different government offices. They have data. They have plans, and you know, to see what partnerships are available, how they can help you with whatever it is you're thinking about. Share information. Look into available land that might be available. Plans for infrastructure. To engage in the planning for the infrastructure, because you know, you're planning a certain development, and getting the BIA road program, try to get roads development to that new site for your new development, whatever that may be. So going through this process, gaining community support, getting support of the leadership, getting input from the market that you targeted for whatever activity it is, understanding what their needs are and how to address their needs, are all critical in taking that idea that you started with and developing a deep understanding of the need that you're addressing, to produce certain outcomes for your community, how to do that, where the location in which you want to do that, support services from different partners, and you end up with maybe with something like this. You're saying, okay, we're seeking to develop an elderly complex here. That might include a central meeting space where we can have events, where we can provide meals around that community area. We're going to have attached housing for elders. We're going to provide areas for gardening. We're going to have areas for exercise. And so basically, this is your develop a conceptual model. You found that, yes, there's strong support for leadership in the community. You involved the community and developing this conceptual design for the project. You've coordinated with partners who also serve the community, and they're going to be involved here in providing elderly services. And you identified funding sources. And so at this point, you're saying, is this something we're ready to pursue? Do we have, are we ready to go on to the next phase? Are we ready to commit? We feel this is a sound concept to pursue. We feel because it is a sound concept and we think it appears to be feasible, we're going to allocate budget to go on to the next phase, which is pre-development. And so let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break before we go on to the pre-development phase. So we'll come back at 1/4 of the hour.
Okay, David, thank you.
Thank you. 11:45, ready to get started again. Okay, well, we talked about the conceptual phase. So the conceptual phase is low cost because it really is just staff time working with the community and organizations in the community, figuring out a goal, a vision for an activity that you're planning for your community to address a community need, to produce, which will help produce a priority outcome that the community desires. And this is really the foundation for the activity, having the right idea. And that may be a great challenge to develop, or it may be blaringly obvious as well. But once you are confident that you have the right idea, have the community support, and it is a priority for the community, you're ready to move on to the next phase. And the next phase is pre-development. And this is where you start spending more money, because you're really starting to invest a lot more time into fleshing out how this might, this activity might be undertaken. So it comes to mind that there's a really interesting situation we have here locally. There's a priority need for road improvement to relocate the highway that runs along the headwaters of the Kenai River, which is a major river, and it's culturally sensitive, it's environmentally sensitive, it's a big fishery. And so the concept to move the highway that runs for, let's say, roughly 5 miles through the mountains, the highway runs directly on the Kenai River, and it's dangerous for users of the road. It's a high use area, so it's dangerous for the people living along the road, pedestrians. It's also environmentally dangerous. And so the concept of relocating the highway was easy. That was an easy concept to commit to. But the pre-development has taken more than 20 years to figure out how to realize the implementation of the concept of relocating the highway.
Wow.
Has been a monumental challenge. It actually is literally the longest environmental review ever done in the United States. And that had to do with because of all the interests in the area, and also all the different landowners in the area, many of which are federal agencies and state agencies. So just really putting a context into this planning process. You having the right concept, it gives you the foundation to build on.
That's why I told them earlier, David, that if
Yeah.
it requires an environmental impact statement, you might want to reconsider that project.
Right, that's for sure. That's for sure. So, having the right idea is great, but now you're moving on to pre-development. It's saying, how can we make this a reality? And that's what pre-development is. It's figuring out what is the scope of the project. What do you need for a site? Is that site available? Can you get site control? Are the soil conditions going to allow you to build economically? Can you can you get environmental clearance for what you want to do? What is it going to cost to build it? Is there funding available to do it? Some of the design criteria, getting the infrastructure into the site, the access roads into the site, and so on. So fleshing all this out can be a major task. And as you go along, going through this process of figuring out how can this become a reality, each piece of new information you're getting is going to allow you to further refine the concept. How managing the costs, addressing the needs of the population you're serving, the delivery of services, getting input from the partners involved with this, considering the operating cost for all this, keep managing that, and certain decisions you are making now are going to have a big impact on your operating costs for the next 50 years. So it's the pre-development tasks are critical to the long-term success of the project. Now, as you go through this, you have to be aware that, yes, we do have to be concerned about the total development cost. And this is one of the requirements of NAHASDA, is that the requirement is that the use of NAHASDA funds must be for developments that are moderate. The character of the development is moderate in standards. Well, okay, what does that mean? I mean, that's what Congress said. It must be moderate. Well, I'm not sure what they mean by that. How can that requirement be met? So what HUD came up with is the total development costs. Now, what they are saying is that the total cost for a development cannot exceed total development cost limits. And to assist you with that, they provide TDC limits for every tribe in the country. And those limits are updated from time to time. The most current update is contained in PIH Notice 2022-16. I might mention that in the past, the TDC, we call it total development costs, TDC for each individual tribe was in the form of an attachment. So you would have the notice referring to the attachment, and then you'd have the attachment, which is a long, very long spreadsheet, as you might imagine. Okay, well, now in the current version, it's no longer attachment. It's actually included in a document. So one document includes both the notice as well as the cost data for each tribe. So it would be impossible to provide cost limits for every type of development that you might possibly undertake with your NAHASDA funds. However, most developments are going to be in the range of 2 to 5 bedrooms. So the cost limits that are published for each tribe are for 1 to 5 units, and those cost limits can be used for a single family home up to a 4-plex. Now, the concept of TDC limits applies to any development that you're undertaking, including model activities. So that might be, community building. It could be an office building. Could be an infrastructure project, whatever. It's really open-ended what a model activity might be. It could also be for a large apartment building, which would be more than 4 units. It could be for a facility that includes more than 5 bedrooms. So if the activity that you're undertaking exceeds the TDC limits that are provided in this PIH notice, then HUD will prepare a TDC limit for the activity that you are undertaking. So you simply have to notify HUD, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a model activity. We're going to be doing a 20-unit building. We're going to be doing a congregate congregate housing that will include more than 5 bedrooms. You know, HUD will develop a custom TDC limit for that particular project. And so, you know, you have to work directly with your field office on getting that. So that's going to take some time, obviously. So the purpose of the TDC is it enforces a moderate design standard by limiting the costs. Let's see, and you know, there is some flexibility in the TDC, by the way. If you develop your own, you have the opportunity of developing your own standards, for example. And if you do that, then you still have to be within the TDC, but you can exceed the TDC by 10%. Without getting HUD approval. If it's over 10%, then you need to get HUD approval for the standards, housing standards that you're adopting. So in other words, under NAHASDA, you're not required to have housing standards. If you do, that gives you a local basis for establishing a TDC, and you have more flexibility than a recipient that does not have housing standards. They would just be operating within the published TDC limits. Also, you're required to document that you are within TDC limits for each individual unit. So it's not a matter of having TDC limit for a project, it's on a per unit basis. So I think the idea there is that if one unit is built for the leader of the community, and that particular unit is way above TDC limits, and on average that works out because all the other units that were built are way below the TDC limits, that you're not going to get away with that. You have to think about it on a per unit basis. Obviously, if every unit you're building is the same, that's easy to do. But if there are variants between the units, you have to plan for how you're going to monitor the cost for each unit. Another thing to consider are the rents that you can, the rents or whatever income you can receive from this development. Well, there's a number of reasons that you need to do that. Number one is your funding source may have restrictions on what you can charge. Certainly NAHASDA does. You know that for rental units, you can't charge more than 30%. And you have the option of also requiring people to pay utilities in addition to that rent, or it might be included in rent. You have flexibility in different ways, but there are limits. Other funding sources have different limits. And so if you're combining funding sources, you have to understand what those different limits are and figure out how you're going to comply with all those various requirements. One strategy is simply to establish your program based on what's most restrictive, and that way you're in compliance with everybody. But you may be able to develop an alternative approach to that by designated units, for example. Another thing to consider is how you're going about with financing. What is your financing plan? So, we know NAHASDA funds are very flexible. We know that's, straightforward. You get an allocation automatically every year based on your formula. You decide how to use those funds in your Indian housing plan. But other funding sources are competitive. You have to go through a process and compete to get an award. Or you might work with lenders. Working with lenders is another way that you can get financing for your project. And then, of course, because the NAHASDA funds are so flexible, that's a great way of filling gaps. If you can identify various funding sources and fill those gaps with those funding sources. Sometimes if you're in for example, if you're building a home ownership program where you're building the homes and people are essentially going to be buying those homes from you, then after construction and you sell the homes, when you sell the home, you get that money back. And so if you get a construction loan, you can use that construction loan to build a project and then pay off that construction loan after you sell the homes. So, that's kind of a step-by-step financing plan, but that's certainly feasible. And there's plenty of examples of tribes doing that. In fact, one leverage program that's part of the NAHASDA is called Title VI. It's called Title VI because it's Title VI of the NAHASDA. It allows you to get a loan guarantee for up to 5 times your annual allocation for need. And that's probably the cheapest construction loan you could get. But we'll talk more about that at the end of our training session. But certainly, developing a financing plan and implementing that financing plan is invariably the most challenging part of development. So the challenge here is to assemble multiple funding sources. And, you have to be aware of when you have to apply, what information you need to put a competitive application together. And if you are successful, how can you use that money? What are the timeframes involved? What are the restrictions involved? And then, of course, is the financing the development process. So getting the land, getting the design, the procurement process to get the contractor, marketing the housing, occupying the housing, dealing with various unforeseen issues within the community, within the governmental structure, political issues, so on and so forth. It's, maneuvering, dealing with all those issues as they come along. Okay, so before we move on there. So getting the pre-development done really has to do with assessing the feasibility of realizing your concept for your activity. We also have to consider developing a project management plan. So that would involve identifying the tasks to realize the project, the list of tasks. And that can sound like a daunting undertaking. but I actually think that that is a organic process, and because this is the way I look at it. You really just start by identifying keystone requirements for your undertaking. And so that might, well, we talked about some of these things already, the environmental review. So you just, that's a keystone task, write that down, environmental review. Financing, design, the procurement, just that simple list that I think we looked at previously here. Going down and making a list of the keystone tasks that need to be accomplished, and then over time, going back and adding subtasks under those major tasks. And really, it's an organic process as you start focusing on the pre-development, what the step-by-step process is going to be in order to get it all done. But once you do that, or as you do it, because it is organic process, that you start saying, well, who can do this? Do we have a staff person that can do that? Is this something we can contract for? Do we need to hire more staff for this undertaking? So you identify your tasks, you assign responsibility for them. Then you can start scheduling those tasks. Now you're building a timeline. Now with that information, now you can start identifying what the costs are going to be. How much is that environmental review going to cost? How much is that design going to cost? How much is that infrastructure going to cost? And so over time, you start building this plan, step by step, day by day. It's just something that grows over time, and you build it up over time. As you're working through this pre-development activities, you're continually getting more information. You're plugging that into your plan. You're time loading it. You're adding it onto your task list. You're assigning responsibility, and you're building that plan. For getting back to financial planning, you need to think about when you can get your money. So it's not as simple as saying, okay, we're going to get our block grant. We think we're going to get our block grant in March or whatever it is, and then we can start spending money. Well, that's not really true. That because you got to get that environmental review done, right? We talked about there's an environmental review requirement to every federal dollar, and so you have to think, well, wait a minute, we got to do the environmental review. Put that on your task list for A&E, for your planning efforts, so on and so forth. If you're doing construction for more than 5 houses, you need to do a full environmental assessment. That's going to add more time to your process than if you were building less than 5, for example. And different agencies are going to have different requirements. You need to be aware what their requirements. Don't expect them to be the same as HUD's. Another thing that I wanted to make sure you're aware of is typically when you're awarded funding, it's going to be conditional. Yes, you've been selected to be awarded this grant, and here are the conditions you need to meet. So you need to understand that money is not available to you now. You have to address those conditions first. I mentioned one environmental review, but there could be others as well. So you don't want to be in a situation that you are planning on using funds from an award you received, but you forgot about one of the conditions, and now you're going to be delayed because you have to go back and check off that requirement. Okay, if you are getting a construction loan, what do you may be able to qualify for the construction loan, no problem. But again, conditions for receiving those funds. Okay, you have to have site control. You have to have, because, this is, construction loan is high risk, and any type of loan, the lender is going to be concerned about mitigating risk, managing risk. And so, this is where conditions come into play, that the funder does not want to suffer the consequences for losing money because something was not done in compliance. So, with a construction loan, you have to have that site control. They're going to want the project to be construction ready. So you have to have your all your design work done. You have to have the construction contract signed, ready to go. Only then are they going to make those funds available to you. All the other funding sources need to be committed also. If you're relying on other sources of funds for the project to be successful, then the bank is going to be concerned about those other funding sources as well. The bank may say, "Oh no, you're not going to use our money until you use all of yours." We don't want to be the first one in. You gotta put skin in the game as well. And then if you intend to pay off the construction loan with permanent loan, then they're going to have to make sure that that's arrangements are made for that as well. And if you're involved tax credits, then you're going to have that limited partnership agreement in place. And if you're going to use home buyers, in other words, you're building homes for buyers, they're going to buy the home from you. You're going to use the proceeds of sale to pay off the construction loan. They want to make sure that these home buyers are pre-qualified. So you just need to understand all the contingencies involved with your sources of financing. And for tax credits, when does the investor start investing money into a tax credit project? That's something that you negotiated between the investor and you as a developer. But typically, they're going to require that partnership agreement to be signed, that the land is, site control is there for the land, the construction contract is signed, ready to go. Subsidy sources are also firmly committed because they're building that they need long-term operation in order to qualify for their credit. So they want to make sure that's in place. And then same thing with bank financing, that you have a firm commitment for that. And the construction loan as well, if you're using that for the project. And then you negotiate when those payments are going to be made periodically, including the last payment. So typically the last payment when construction is complete, the lien period has expired, and there's lien releases. So the deal about liens and lien releases is typically you're going to have a contractor. You're paying the contractor. You're not paying the subcontractors. You're paying the contractor. You assume that the contractor is paying his subs and his suppliers. But if he's not, they can file a lien on your property. So you need to make sure that everything is in order there. And if so, then, investors are willing to make their contribution. And then let's see, they want to see the DCR, the direct, what is that? Direct credit record. It's records that payment of deposits that you're making. So in other words, that the rental income is coming into your bank account. Now we're talking about tax credit last payment. So you're in operation now. You have an income coming in. That income is coming into the project bank accounts, and the construction loan is paid off if it's payable. Because of the your financing plan. When this construction loan paid off, oftentimes that'll be with the permanent loan that's available to you after closing. The construction loan is much more expensive financing than a permanent loan because of the risk involved. With a permanent loan, the project is already there and it secures the loan for the permanent financing. With the construction loan, all you have is raw land, and there's very little collateral there for a construction loan. So there's high risk, and therefore the interest rate is going to be maybe twice as high or 3 times. And then the tax credit, the form is filed to get the tax credits awarded, would be the other requirement typically. All right. For permanent rental loan, well, it's similar. Construction is complete. The lien issue is resolved. 95% occupancy for 90 days or more. So if you're a market-based real estate developer, your cash flow from occupancy is going to enable you to pay off the permanent loan. So that's why the focus is on occupancy. And well, it is for tax credits for that matter too. In order to qualify for tax credits, you have to have it fully occupied within a certain amount of time. And then, the subsidy sources are available as planned, and the construction loan is paid off if it's payable based on your financing plan. Okay, and then let's take a look for home ownership developments. So for the home buyer to get their loan, the home buyer has to be qualified by the lender, and the requirements for the lender is going to be based on the mortgage product that they're using or the home buyer is using, and different mortgages have different requirements. So they're going to vary in interest rates, and there's a lot of variability in mortgage loans. All mortgage loans are not the same. So we'll be talking a little bit about mortgage loans at the end of this webinar. Of course, you have site control because the property collateralizes the loan. Typically, there's going to be some type of financial assistance involved with the program you're running. So that down payment assistance, whatever it is, needs to be ready to go. And typically all those closing documents would be signed at one time. The appraisal is complete. The appraisal is key because the property secures the loan. And you need to have an appraisal that shows the value of the property based on an appraisal is at least equal to the amount of the loan. And it says, if not a single close 184 loan. Well, what are we talking about here? The 184, there is a mortgage loan program called Section 184, and that is an ONAP mortgage loan program. And we're going to be talking about that at the end of the webinar to give you more information about that. But the 184 program has a unique feature in that you can get a loan, a mortgage loan, not only to buy a house, but also to build a house. And so it's kind of a unique, because typically you can't have a construction loan and a permanent financing in one, but in one single 184 loan you can. So that's what that's about. But to get that single close 184 loan, or I should say, to get that 184 loan, that's not a single close like any other mortgage loan. You're going to have that construction complete, ready to be occupied. The lien concern needs to be resolved, and the construction loan has to be paid off. So there's no liability on the title. So typically when we talk about the developing a financial plan for development, we talk about sources and uses. And here's a simple example of, you're going to buy the land. We're going to build. We have a building budget. We have a contingency budget. We have an architectural and engineering budget. And then we have a budget for soft costs. And then where's the money going to come from? You can see there's a list here. We're going to have pay for roughly half of it with the return from selling the property to home buyers, and then the balance is going to come from our NAHASDA grant. I would say that this is the home, because roughly, well, $305,000 of the total cost is only going to become available to us after we sell those homes, right? We're not going to sell those homes before they're built. We can only sell those homes after they're built. So how are we going to, where's the funding going to come from to build the homes? So that's the gap here. Where's that $305,000 going to come from? Well, maybe you have that in your available in your NAHASDA program. Maybe you're going to get a construction loan. Maybe you're going to get a Title VI loan. Maybe you're going to try to get a single close 184 loan. Maybe you can get a loan from the Federal Home Loan Bank. But this is how you build a financial plan. Okay, and it's always a good idea to consider alternatives. Don't get locked into one idea. What other approaches can be used in order to address the need and to develop the project? by looking ahead and consider options, you can hopefully prevent problems down the line. So we're at the point now of making a decision, final decision, if this project is in fact feasible. Do we have a sound financing plan? We have our financing committed. We have, if it's a home ownership program, we have our home buyers are pre-qualified. We have a commitment to buy the land at fair market value, contingent upon it pending the approval of the environmental review. So we have infrastructure is in place. So we're ready to move forward now with the construction phase of the development that we're working on. Okay, so let's talk about construction. And what we're talking about with construction is it begins, of course, with signing that construction contract. And it ends with occupancy. And, we're talking about construction, but construction involves a lot of different things. And I think we touched on most of these things, or I think, but not all. So one thing we already talked about is wage rates. You have to administer wage rates either as Davis-Bacon or tribally determined wage rates. So you have to be, you have to make, you need to know which you're doing and what the requirements are for either system. You have to exercise Indian preference. Well, Indian preference, we're going to be talking about in a moment, but that is involved in two ways. One way is with the procurement process, but secondly, in terms of providing preferences, not just in the award of contracts, but also for employment and training. So that's going to be dealing with Indian preference is going to be an ongoing issue throughout the construction period. And then inspections and quality control. Being on top of quality control is critically important. You are the owner. You're going to suffer the consequences if there's problems in this regard. So you need to be on top of it to make sure you're getting what you think you're getting. And that goes for warranty enforcement as well. Your contract includes provision for warranty. You need to manage that warranty enforcement, or it's really wasted. Insurance, there is substantial insurance provisions involved here in protecting your interests, both in the construction aspect and of course, after you take ownership of the property, insuring it from loss, insuring yourself from liability, workman's comp, so on and so forth. And then the construction budget, making sure you have enough funds and feeling comfortable with the amount of contingency you have available to you in case there's runovers for change orders or other issues that may come up through the course of construction. So figuring out what needs to be done for each of these components and who's going to be doing it and the costs involved and so on, you know, is part, it really needs to be part of your planning process. So part of the decision making with construction is dealing with changes that come along through the course of the construction process. That can be, if you have a good, you can minimize the changes with careful review, making sure that the design is complete and sufficient and clear. Having pre-construction meetings and pre-bid meetings all help to reduce change orders. But you have to be ready to deal with problems when things go bad. If you come up against serious quality issues through the course of construction, it could take a lot of time sorting out a problem contractor difficulties. And so spending time to make sure that your construction documents are clear and functional in terms of giving you the tools you need to deal with problems is very important. One of the really important things to do is understand what your contract says and make changes to that contract before you go to bid if you're not comfortable with the boilerplate. Because when things go bad, it's going to fall back to what's written in the contract. And so you want to make sure that you know how to deal with situations based on what the contract says. And if the contract is insufficient in how to deal with problems as the owner, then you need to make those revisions to the contract before you go out to bid. So I think a lot of times the term boilerplate is used. Oh, it's just boilerplate. Well, it's not. That diminishes the importance of the contract. The contract defines your relationship between the owner and the contractor. So you want to know what that boilerplate says. So when things go bad, you know how to deal with it. And then if more funds are needed, what happens? So you need just to have that plan B in mind. But you know, you can go a long way in protecting yourself with bonding, for example, a construction bond, a bid bond, a payment bond. You know, those things protect you as the owner. If the contractor does not do what they're supposed to do, you have fallback through those insurance protections. Okay, so now with construction completed, we move on to the operational phase. Let's see, okay. I think this is a good place to stop because this introduces us to operations. And we're not going to have time to complete this. So we're substantially ahead of schedule here with our agenda. So I think it'd be better just to break for today here, and we'll pick it up here tomorrow.
I agree.
Everybody's in agreement on that?
Yep. Does anybody have any questions over all of the development process that David has gone over before we break for the day? I know he covered a lot of material, a lot of really good material, but it there's a bunch for you to absorb on doing development, and development is not a simple process either. And you do need to take all of those things into consideration. Like I said yesterday, sometimes just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. So this is where he said, you know, look at the concept phase, and you may find out that maybe you need to wait a while before you tackle it once you've looked at the concept phase before you actually go into a more pre-development phase. Any questions from anybody? I know it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, I'd be glad to go back over anything in greater detail.
Well, you did a great job on it, David.
Oh, thank you.
I think they're ready to just call it a day.
Well, sure. Yeah, I can understand that. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll pick up here tomorrow, same place, same time.
You have a
And,
comment. Somebody said, thank you, David. Great job, and have a good day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thank you so much.
All righty.